Disco Elysium is about the body, your body, our bodies, God's body, even. In its opening moments, the majestic voices within our main character's head, the ancient reptilian brain, and the limbic system cleverly narrate the state of unconsciousness that our alcohol induced amnesiac experiences. A state of nothingness, a warm, primordial blackness. Nothing town to fuck all borough. A one-way trip to an all-consuming silence, a sweet song of death. However, before the Lieutenant W. Freighter can slip into total night swimming without ex-wives,
the song of death is sweet and endless. But what is this? Somewhere in the soul, bloated man meet around you. A sensation.
A sensation of pain, of gaining consciousness of the weak and burdensome body, capable of feeling the agony of the stench of liquor arising from his mouth, of the ungodly headache that it brings with it, and the skull-piercing sound of some mechanical hell creature forcing him back into his damned existence. The body, Harry's body, is pathetic. And we are, over and over again, throughout the course of the game, made aware of the absolute depths of its ineptitude. One of the ways in which the game does this is through death. Death awaits every corner in this game, not the kind of death you will see in other games like Dark Souls, where every death, no matter how excruciating or stupid, is a lesson learned, a step put forward. No, the deaths of Disco Elysium is honorless, undignified, and meaningless. You can die if you choose to stay in the intro's nothing soup. You can die if you try to catch your tie that's tied to a slowly rotating fan. You can die if you sit in a certain chair. You can die if you read too much into a ledger. Yes, if you choose a physical focused character build, you can avoid most of these easily, but yet again, the game's focus on the body remains intact. Although 1/4 of the skills available to you are directly based upon the physical, that is, the body, all the skills, to an extent, affect how the body is maintained throughout the game. Many physical actions, such as jumping across rooftops, performing a flying roundhouse kick on Measurehead, sitting down on a chair, or threatening the Hardy Boys with a gun, all take skill checks across the categories. Even looking at the beautiful portraits for all the skills, the musculature and the fleshiness seen in all the portraits stand as evidence to this. Hands, faces, mouths, brains, heads, arms, muscles. The navigation of the game, too, grounds the player in the character's existence as hot pockets of flesh and willpower. There is no flying or teleporting, with one exception.
You know, for the record, you didn't teleport there. You just climbed the ladder with your eyes closed.
It is the same walking and running through these same grounds, the same roads and pavements, and the same sad fields. Furthermore, the hinge of the game itself, the body hanging behind the whirling in rags, too, is expressed to be vulgarly fleshy. Its lesions, its stench, its bloatedness, and its discoloration, all highlighted in our conversation with it. The body, with its immediate existence, its inevitability, is what Disco Elysium is interested in. Yes, other games also share this interest sometimes. A rather recent game that pops into my head is the indie RPG Fear and Hunger. It's a game where the body is also highlighted in its fragility, a game where situations may lead you to literally cut off limbs to survive. The sound effect for the said action, harrowingly sharp and scarring. But Fear and Hunger's perception of the body is one of dismissal. It is a game where the flesh and the bones are mere objects to be maintained and rearranged. A game where you can have sex with a living corpse to become a new being of merged flesh. A game which requires you to dismember enemies or get dismembered limb by limb. A game with infinitely more genitalia than Disco Elysium or pretty much any game I've ever played. And yet, the body remains subordinate to the powers of the greater divine forces at play. In Disco Elysium, however, there is no greater forces at play, and even if there are, those forces manifest themselves through the body. It, of course, places the body above and over any other form of existence, over thought, or even over ideas. This may seem surprising to some, but obvious to others. The latter group would probably be familiar with the political and philosophical leanings of the game and its developers.
And Marx and Engels for providing us the political education. Thank you.
Dialectical materialism. Materialism. Matter over mind. This dichotomy is one that can be traced to have influenced philosophers all throughout the history of philosophy. The materialists and the idealists. Is it the ideas which facilitate all of which we experience in our lives, or is it matter? Do ideas dictate the course of history, or is it the people who make it? Are ideas worth billions of dollars and hordes of wealth, or is the labor required to materialize them more essential? Now, I said that the fact that Disco Elysium places the body over ideas may be found to be surprising for some because indeed ideas are a big part of the game too. Ideas of morality and law form the very basis of the game's plot. Ideas of communism, monarchism, liberalism, and moralism all form the past, present, and future of Revachol. As players, we know more about the world of the game through Harry's skills, which themselves are vehicles for ideas. Moreover, one of the main mechanics of the game is itself literally the internalization of ideas in the form of the thought cabinet. You can be a superstar cop, a sorry cop, the cop of the apocalypse, the hobo cop, an ultra-liberal, the world's most laughable centrist, a feminist, a fascist, a communist, and a fuck-ton of other witty self-titles. However, despite them all, the man you are, Harrier Dubois, remains the same middle-aged, overweight bag of flesh and bones. No matter what political or philosophical leanings your Harry may internalize, the expression, Harry's face agonizingly contorted into an obscene smile, remains a fact to be dealt with. The fact that Harry exclaims, or at least has the possibility to exclaim, "I don't want to be this kind of animal anymore," remains the same. This kind of animal, an animal of flesh and bones, capable of drowning in the ocean of misery and suffering. And yet, Disco Elysium is not a pessimistic game. In fact, Harry's relationship with this statement, "I don't want to be this kind of animal anymore," is one that finds itself radically deconstructed by the final act of the game. I'm of course talking about the final revelation, the boat ride over to the isolated island, the deserter, and, of course, the miracle. The miracle of Disco Elysium is rather peculiar. You see, to me, the insulindian miracle, Harry and Kim's encounter with the phasmid that was dismissed to be pseudoscience all this time, is perhaps the greatest political and philosophical statement made in this game, and maybe even all games ever. Yes, this rather unrealistic, seemingly apolitical moment is the most political thing to happen in a game that lets you roleplay as a communist, a fascist, a liberal, and so on. And why is that? Well, let's talk about miracles. What are miracles? Well, they are things that happen but have no real possibility of happening and also have a positive impact on the people to whom they happen to. A saving grace, a divine intervention, a hand of God. God. The God from the machine, Deus ex machina, is perhaps the thing that comes to my mind when I think of miracles in art. For those uninitiated, Deus ex machina refers to a trope in narratives where, typically by the third act, every problem faced by the characters are solved by either a literal god or something divine. It gets its name from Greek theater, where plays that employed this trope used either a crane to propel the actor playing God from above, or some kind of machinery to lift them up from beneath the stage. Many plays written by the playwright Euripides, and some even written by Sophocles, involve such gods from the machine. What is notable about this is how philosophers and other men of words saw this trope as quite damaging to the medium of theater. Aristotle, in his Poetics, criticized Deus ex machina for babying the audience and breaking their immersion. Narratives ought to prefer likely events, even if impossible, to improbable possible ones, he says. Stories should not be made from illogical parts. In the best case, they should contain nothing illogical unless it comes from outside the plot itself. He calls it strange if a writer chooses to shoehorn in an impossible event into a story where more probable outcomes can easily be pursued. In simpler terms, for Aristotle, the story must be logical to its bitter end and not rely on some divine contrivance to tie up loose knots. And a somewhat similar but totally different criticism was made by the Taylor Swift of philosophers Friedrich Nietzsche, who basically accused Deus ex machina of killing tragedy. Yeah, I guess that guy really likes to accuse people of murder. Man, Fred, you can't just do that. Come on. In his very first philosophical work titled The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche essentially identifies a deep importance and strength in the tragedy. These were stories that crescendoed into the characters landing upon a sad and cruel fate, often losing their battles, succumbing to their problems, or even losing everything they ever had to begin with. Nietzsche observes a metaphysical comfort in them. They essentially force the audience into facing the cruel meaninglessness of their own sufferings. As his famous quote goes, "So it's gonna be forever, or it's gonna go down in flames. You can tell me when it's over, if the high was worth the pain. Got a long list of ex-lovers. They'll tell you I'm insane. 'Cause you know I love the players, and you love the game." Which roughly translates from German to those human beings who are of any concern to me, I wish suffering, desolation, sickness, ill-treatment, indignities. I wish that they should not remain unfamiliar with profound self-contempt, the torture of self-mistrust, the wretchedness of the vanquished. I have no pity for them because I wish them the only thing that can prove today whether one is worth anything at all, that one endures. Okay, I guess that doesn't help. So basically, Nietzsche saw suffering, specifically pointless or meaningless suffering, as an inevitability in life. To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. Although I can't find the source to this, even though it's attributed to him by Goodreads. Anyway, the tragedy here, the Greek tragedy, presented the audience with raw, pointless, and cruel suffering, and by doing so, it affirmed the tragic lives of its audience. In that sense, it was Dionysian. It held both the tragedy as well as the pleasures of life equally high and embraced them with zeal. Like the god of wine representing both the pleasure of sensuous experience as well as its pain, the tragedy was life-affirming. However, The deus ex machina, which Nietzsche identifies as being born from Socratic culture, a culture which, instead of being Dionysian or life-affirming, was focused on merely fitting life and its suffering into logical and rational wholes. The Socratic deus ex machina solved all the problems of the characters. It killed tragedy with Socratic knowledge and wisdom, and thereby actively ignored the pointlessness of lives' suffering, essentially negating it instead of affirming. Nietzsche was heavily influenced by one Arthur Schopenhauer, and if you haven't heard the name before, this little gremlin is heavily associated with pessimism and is quite well known for characterizing humans and human existence as not very cool or fun. For that reason, I couldn't help but roll my eyes when I first read about Nietzsche, because yeah, life is suffering for a lot of us, but from a materialist perspective, to claim such a thing and diagnose all human existence and is doomed to eternal causeless suffering is kind of a douchebag move. Life sucks, it's all pain and misery, and there's no meaning and we'll all die. Sure, dude. It's juvenile. However, then I actually read more into Nietzsche, and one of the most interesting things about him, and perhaps something that makes him an interesting person to bring up in this discussion of Disco Elysium, is his highly spoken about journey with his physical health. Nietzsche was a sickly man who suffered many health complications throughout his life, which eventually ended with him going mad. He suffered from numerous debilitating migraines throughout his life and many other painful afflictions from gastric problems, nausea, joint problems, worsening eyesight, and so on. Jonas Cheka on YouTube has a very good video going in depth into Nietzsche's battle with these bodily afflictions, many of which left him bedridden and unable to do anything for extended periods of time. And what is most interesting to me is how his experience with these pains informed his work. Because his body was something he could not ignore, his thought too gave the body the gravitas that was denied to it by the philosophers that came before. The body, for Nietzsche, was not a prison. It was not something separate from him. It was him. And in his well-known book named The Gay Science, his prose contained the energy and vitality that he'd regain whenever he would experience recovery, being able to read, work, socialize, listen to music, and so on as he pleased. The body, both the hot seat of all the pleasures of the world as well as its pains, is me, is you, is Dionysus. The body is not weak, it is powerful, and it is a part of a life that's worth living. Disco Elysium, taken in this context, is a Dionysian game. All throughout the game, your body, Harry, is where all the suffering and the pain are at. The withdrawal from Harry's drinking and his overall lack of fitness, alongside his inability to move on from his ex-wife and his hypersensitivity to the misery of the world, all paint a tragic picture of a deeply broken man, surrounded by a deeply broken society. However, just like the boat ride over to the island, highlighted by Sea Power's ethereal track, Burn Baby Burn, Disco Elysium cares about life. The conflicting lines "Want to be free" and slow dances into a climactic vocal focus on the words Disco Inferno. Disco in Latin is to know, to learn. As such, the term Disco Inferno refers to learning and growing from suffering. But Disco Elysium does not reduce it to a necessary step to utopia. The beginning of the game finds Harry slumped over and refusing to accept his being as human. He refuses his body, he refuses humanity. He begs his mother to comfort him, facing the fact that there is a head attached to his neck and he's in it. However, in the climactic section of the game, the encounter with the phasmid, the miracle, the body gets restructured into something affirmative for Harry. "Are you the miracle?" Harry asks.
"No, you are the miracle,"
replies the insulindian phasmid. Compared to a median creature with its powerless passive existence, Harry, people, are filled with the fiery power to replace everything in the universe with nothing just by accident. We are responsible for the creation of the pail that will eventually consume all in Disco Elysium. The miracle is not a god from the machine. Instead, here, it is a god from within the flesh itself. The real revelation of Disco Elysium is human agency. Okay, so I would like to pivot to a certain piece of media that is insanely influential and is considered a classic, one that has been non-stop talked about by the right and the left, the cool people and the incels, ever since it came out, and will be talked about for a long time. I'm of course talking about the Wachowski sisters' sci-fi cornerstone 1999's The Matrix. Alongside being just a pop culture phenomenon that took the world by storm, it also popularized certain phrases enough for them to find a permanent place in popular lexicon. The red pill or the blue pill, living in a simulation, or a glitch in the Matrix. A glitch in the Matrix. So, for those of you who are somehow, due to some freak accident, still unaware of what this film is about, basically, there is this guy played by Keanu Reeves who is told by this bald guy and this hot leather girl that his entire world and his life is actually a simulation, a mere mirage, and that humans are all actually being harvested like crops to fuel some evil AI. Based upon that old Plato's cave concept, the Matrix is about Neo, that is Keanu Reeves, joining the bald guy in his small rebellion force and discovering himself to be a prophesized messiah, the One, capable of manipulating the simulation's code to his own whims and actually fight the AI. Now, the Matrix has been interpreted, reinterpreted, critiqued and praised in so many different ways, some better than others. But what I'm most interested in here is the theme of a revolution within the Matrix. It isn't such a groundbreaking thing to point out, in fact, taken into context with other films that the Wachowski sisters have worked on, from Speed Racer to V for Vendetta, which is quite literally an adaptation of an anarchist superhero from the wonderful and weird mind of Alan Moore. It is quite obvious that they are interested in a revolution in every sense of the word, from a full-on socio-political one to a more personal and identity-focused one. However, what interests me is the exact way in which these revolutions pan out in their stories. In The Matrix, the saving grace, the singular advantage that the rebel group bets on, is a prophecy told by a woman named the Oracle. And when she eventually meets Neo, whom Morpheus thinks is the One, she's quite forthcoming in telling him and the audience that Neo may not be the One after all. Of course, he is the One, but him becoming the One isn't through, the power of friendship or organization or even the power of morality or ideology. He kind of dies and then he is the One. Similarly, V from V for Vendetta also transforms into a Jesus-like state where he sustains many bullets and injuries while devil triggering through a bunch of enemies and staying alive until the perfect moment to die. In both these cases, a big part of the revolution is played by miracles or fate. It's almost like things as they are simply cannot continue, and thus the very fabric of reality itself is bending in order to bring about the change, a glitch in the matrix. I've brought up Mr. Hegel before on this channel, or as I like to call him, the Big Hego. One of his most famous ideas, or at least a popular version of that idea, is the notion of the Geist, or the spirit, the universal mind. For him, history is the unfolding of the world spirit, the Weltgeist. It is the spirit becoming conscious of itself and attaining freedom, the mode through which its self-consciousness can exist. Every aspect of history, every single historical event is a necessary step in this process. Die List der Vernunft, the cunning of reason, the idea that reason, the tendency for the unfolding of the spirit itself, almost manipulates people into doing its bidding. A very popular instance of this is when Hegel described seeing Napoleon arriving on his horse as the world spirit on horseback. And while I'm very sympathetic to the idea that history is going somewhere and that it's not just all random and that it will in fact work out in the end, the following 2 centuries after Hegel's death has provided more than enough evidence to challenge this idea. Things don't seem to go where we assumed they'd go. Moreover, this is also where Marx and the left Hegelians diverged from Hegel, as they identified him denying people of agency. We can't rely on some miracle to change the world. It needs to be changed by our hands. The one is not gonna randomly show up tomorrow and abolish capital. No Guy Fawkes mask-wearing vigilante will walk through a rain of bullets to abolish authoritarianism. People have the power. And yet, where are we now? The promised Neverland remained and still remains a distant dream. It seems that every year, the world just seems a little darker. Every election cycle seems to give too much power to the most unhinged and the cartoonishly villainous, and political action has become synonymous with taking the political compass test, and to organize seems to have become the act of writing leftist on one's Twitter bio. Every day that passes, the future seems just a little bit more bleaker.
A waste. The material base for an uprising has eroded. The working class has betrayed mankind and themselves. The historic opportunity for a revolution has passed. It will not come back anymore, however hard I try, whatever I do.
Pathetically pleads the deserter, the murderer behind Disco Elysium, miserable and lonely as he doom spirals within his isolated island. Nothing ever happens. The state of things, the status quo, seems to consume all. And because it feels like that, a general feeling of hopelessness has come to define the post-end of history left. As someone who inevitably brings up this kind of thing in most conversations I have with people, I've identified the same indifference, apathy, and an overall feeling of powerlessness within most like-minded or adjacent people. A cultural doomerism. And while I sympathize, I can say I quite agree. Another returning name for the channel, the French philosopher Alain Badiou, posits a new system of ethics. Historically, ethics, or what is right and wrong, has been deeply identified with conservatism and the political right. That kind of ethics presupposes the legitimacy and the rightness of the status quo. It presupposes an idle and unchanging version of human life and crams everyone within its small walls. For Badiou, however, the good within this new ethics has nothing to do with a presupposed human nature. Instead, It has to do with truth and the event. What are those? Well, an event is a radical break in the continuity of the status quo, the state of things. The event is a previously unforeseen development that becomes the obvious course of history after it has happened. It is something miraculous which seems to be a necessity after the fact. It seems illogical from within the rationale of the status quo. It appears as a glitch in the Matrix. Like the idea of a new utopia that Zizek argues for, a kind of utopia imagined by the masses as a result of the complete inactivity or seeming inactivity of history, something born from within the shattered lives, the burnt out minds, and the broken bodies of the working class. The event is utter breakdown from within which something new can arise. The one is an event, the awakening of a bug, a negative force from within the system, within the status quo, which eventually turns against it, is an unforeseen, improbable development that completely changes the course of the story. And within the story, Morpheus, Trinity, and all those who have faith in Neo as being the one, even when he doubts it himself, all who refused to give up on hope, to give up on the one, all who showed fidelity to the event, are the good. For Badiou, to live an ethical life, to be good, you must not shake from your fidelity to the event. Faith and hope are words that have come to stimulate a sort of scorn within the new left. After the hike in popularity of scientific reductionist personalities within pop culture, as well as a general non-constructive neoliberal apathy towards tradition and habits of collectivities, to be accused of relying on faith and hope alone is highly disadvantageous. A very common criticism I've heard many make toward the radical left is that they are similar to theists in that they have faith in a revolution, a grand change, a glitch in the Matrix. While, of course, hope alone cannot make anything happen. But remember, the revolution, any kind of change within the status quo, will always look like a miracle, an illogical misstep in the way things were supposed to go. The insulindian phasmid was believed to be some cuckoo mythology conspiracy shit that was rejected by official scientific circles in the world of Disco Elysium. And yet, in our final moments, encountering the near-perfect embodiment of Badiou's evil, the deserter, a man who betrayed the event, a man who now continues to deny human agency, to deny the power within the flesh and bones of human beings, to deny life, the miracle shows itself to us.
In honor of your will, Lieutenant Euphrator, that you kept from falling apart in the face of sheer terror, day after day, second by second. Detective, arriving on the scene.
Harry was born to detect the change in the tide. There may be, in fact, no predestined road we are taking. But in all the chaos and the contingency, after it's all done, no matter how improbable or miraculous, it always seems like the only thing that could have happened. It retroactively becomes a necessity. Harry's life, through hope and action, becomes a necessity to the world. After wallowing deep in the belly of eternal misery and hopelessness, after disowning humanity, Harrier Dubois, we are shown the God within the flesh. An intensely powerful push from the back, yelling, "Keep going, keep hoping. One day, I will be back at your side." I would often go there There's a tiny church there, the smallest church in Sussex. Though it once was larger, how the rail may rest there, down through the mist there, toward the Seven Sisters, toward those white cliffs there. I would often stay there, in that tiny yard there. I have been so glad here, looking forward to the past here. But now you are alone. None of this matters at all. Thank you for watching this video. Shout out to my wonderful patrons Abs, Ali, Andrew Frucci, Archagent Everlasting, and Key for supporting my work here. If you want early access to these videos as well as some other stuff coming very soon, it's final season, and after that I will get the Patreon up and running to its full potential, I promise. Check out the link in the description and consider becoming a member. Anyway, thank you for watching again. Comment your thoughts on the video down below and subscribe and like for more stuff, I guess. But yeah, that's it. Keep being hopeful. Sunrise Parabellum.